Ja bih htio prvo da se iskreno zahvalim na ovom pozivu i na prilici da vám se obratim. És köszönöm szépen, szeretném megköszönni ezt a megtisztelő meghívást, ezt a lehetőséget, hogy szóljak Önökhöz. And let me repeat in English, it was my real pleasure to get this invitation and to have an opportunity to speak to you. And now let me start with my own address. I spoke first in Serbian because we are in Serbia and I am a citizen of Serbia. I continued in Hungarian because Hungarian is one of the official languages in the Vojvodina, and this is my native language. And I continued in English because I wanted to address you in English. Now, is this equality? And is this full tolerance? One could argue that it is not, because, as President Pastor mentioned, Vojvodina has 6 official languages. I did not speak Slovak, I did not speak Romanian, I did not speak Ruthenian. And also we have the issue of Croatian. Croatian is one of the official languages. Croatian is very close to Serbian. I could have chosen Serbian words which would have been equal to Croatian, but Croatian is one of the additional official languages. Now, the problem of closely related languages is not a unique problem in the former Yugoslavia. One of my field in which I've been doing research and I'm teaching is arbitration, and I just learned that the biggest number of our participants are from Sweden and Norway. So let me cite from the Norwegian Act of Arbitration, which says that if the language of arbitration is Norwegian, Swedish and Danish may be used. So this is an approach to closely related languages. In the Danish Act of Arbitration and in the Swedish Act of Arbitration, there is no such provision. So the point I'm trying to make is that it's not simple and it's not easy to handle diversity and to reach equality. Of course, one possible approach to equality in choosing the language in which I'm addressing you would have been possibly to speak Breton, which is a minority language in France and which I suppose nobody here speaks. So if I would have spoken Breton, it would have been full equality. Everybody would have treated equally. But equal treatment is not necessarily fair treatment. And there's also another small problem with this, and that is that I don't speak Breton either. So the point I'm trying to make is that getting to the goal, which is equality and tolerance, it is not sufficient to have good intentions. We have to consider details, and these details are sometimes subtle, sometimes there are nuances, and sometimes there are difficult choices. Let me start with what I think is relatively easy. And it's relatively easy that the way to equality and tolerance is by abandoning discrimination. Discrimination is clearly incompatible with equality and tolerance. And this is a very obvious starting point. And I think that everybody here present is for equality and tolerance and against discrimination. But now we are coming to the much more difficult question, and this is what is actually equality and what is actually tolerance. We have seen that discrimination is wrong, and this also means that segregation is wrong. And this is not a difficult threshold to pass. I think it is not difficult among us to agree that segregation is wrong. Although one has to take into consideration that segregation is still a fact of life in many countries in a considerable part of the world, And there are still people who are belonging to the right race or the right kind or right religion, and others who don't and who are therefore impure. Now, in overcoming segregation, in overcoming discrimination, the first step is to allow those who are different to join us. And today it's obvious. For years, decades, centuries, it was difficult. So it's clear that in order to at least approach equality, we have to allow, in America, black kids to go to school with the same school with whites. And this was for a long time not a fact, but since many, many decades, it is a pure and obvious and clear fact. It also means that we have to allow Roma children to go to schools where Hungarian, Serbian, Slovak, or let's say French, or Swedish, or Norwegian pupils are studying. So allowing those who are different to join the majority is the first and rather obvious step. And let me continue with another example, which is less obvious. So to allow blacks to go to the same school with whites, it's an obvious precondition of equality. If we allow Muslims coming to our countries to become Christians, is this equality? And here we do have a problem, because what about Muslims who do not want to become Catholics, or do not want to be Orthodox, or do not want to become Protestant, but want to be Muslims within a Christian minority? Or to give even more obvious examples, equality in Belgium would not be to allow all Wallons to be Flamands, or all Flamands to be Wallons, or allow Germans to be either Flamand or Wallon. So allowing those who are different to join the majority is, yes, something which should be permitted, which should be obvious, but it's not in itself a formula which would provide for true equality and for true tolerance. So this is a step. Yes, we have to allow others to join us if they want, but this is not the end of our fight for tolerance and equality. Let me say that there have been times in which we had rather brutal intolerance. I was studying recently some rules which were crafted under the German occupation of Banat. Banat is part of Vojvodina, and this is where I was born. There was a set of rules regarding culture, which was particularly interesting. It was a Verordnungsblatt, it's a rule of official paper of official rules, and you had these absolutely stunning nuances. For example, in a movie, those who were Jews, Romas, or who were married to Jews and Romas were disallowed to be ushers, to take people to their seat. In a variété, you could not employ Romas and Jews, but you could employ those who were married to Romas and Jews. However, in a theater, it was prohibited to employ either Romas or Jews and those who were married to Romas and Jews. So one is really sometimes asking who had this really mind to find these nuances within insanity. It's all insanity, but you had nuances within insanity. And this was a fact of life between 41 and the end of 44. Now, this is obviously wrong. We had rules which were clearly discriminatory, and it is not difficult today to go one step beyond that. But let me also add that you had sometimes attitudes which were clearly anti-discriminatory, but not fully and honestly so. The first defeat of Hitler were the Olympic Games in 1936, where Jesse Owens won the biggest number of gold medals. And Jesse Owens didn't belong to the right race, he belonged to the wrong race, and he was the biggest winner of the Olympic Games, and this was a defeat of Hitler. But what less people know, when Jesse Owens returned to America and was hailed as a hero and wanted to go to a dormitory because he was studying, he was disallowed to go to a dormitory for whites. So the big hero of anti-discrimination, the big hero of victory over Hitler, was not allowed to go in a white-only dormitory in 1936. Which means that the fight of discrimination cannot be and must not be reduced to the fight of slogans. Joining the right slogans doesn't mean to be on the right side. But let me now open a question which is probably even more difficult. I said that it's important, and it's a critically important first step, to allow others to join us. Not to prohibit someone to marry someone from another race or other nationality or other religion, and not to have other barriers either. But allowing others to join us has to be based on a choice. So, for example, if one would say that a Serb in Hungary can join Hungarian schools, this really makes sense if the Serb in Hungary has a choice, if there's a Serbian school as well. Otherwise, it's not a real choice. If you say to someone, yes, you can join the school of the majority, and you have a choice, you either join the school of majority or you don't go to school. That's hardly a choice. So in allowing others to join the majority, these others have to have a true choice, a real choice, and this is a critically important element of tolerance. Now, let me go a little bit more into details of what is equality and what is difference. I would like to start with two quotations. One is from a famous French writer, and other is from a famous lawyer. The French writer is Anatole France. And Anatole France said the following about equality and about law. He says, in their majestic equality, our laws forbid the rich and the poor alike to sleep on the bridges. So we have full equality. The poor are disallowed to speak on the bridges. The rich are also disallowed. The millionaires cannot speak on the bridges either. Hence, we have full equality. Now, I think everybody understands what is Anatole France targeting. And this is a recurring problem with equality, how to apply equality, equal rules to different people. And here we have a very, very famous opinion from a judge of the International Court of Justice, a Japanese judge, actually, Tanaka. Judge Tanaka is his name. And his opinion is the most quoted opinion on the issue of the juxtaposition of equality and difference. and it is in the Southwest Africa cases from 1996. And Judge Tanaka said, among others, the idea of equality does not exclude the different treatment of persons from the consideration of the differences or factual circumstances such as sex, age, language, religion, economic condition, and other. And now comes the sentence which is most often quoted. To treat different matters equally in a mechanical way would be as unjust as to treat equal matters differently. The principle is to treat equally what are equal and unequally what are unequal. This is not only permitted, but also required. So Judge Tanaka and the International Court of Justice's yardstick and measurement is that in order to have equality, we have to treat equally those who are equal and differently those who are different. Or to make it obvious, it is not equality. We had a speaker from Switzerland to allow everybody to speak German or Switzerdeutsch, and it's not equality to allow everybody to speak French or Italian or Rätoroman. We have equality if everybody has a human space for his or her own language, and this is then equality. Heeding difference rather than disregarding difference can lead us to equality. Earlier speakers have quoted the European Charter for Regional and Minority Languages, and I would also like to devote some attention to this. It has a definition of languages which deserve protection. And these are regional minority languages, and they are defined as traditionally used within a given territory of a state by nationals of the state who form a group numerically smaller than the rest of the state population, and it has to be a language different from the official language of the state, and also it should not include dialects or languages of migrants. And let me stop for a moment with languages of migrants, which is a sensitive point, and probably a point which will become even more sensitive after a decade or two. Let me approach this again a little bit through a personal angle. My father was born in January 1912. He started school a little bit earlier. He was not yet fully 6-year-old. He started school in 1917. My hometown at that time was part of the Austro-Hungarian monarchy. So he was going to Hungarian school. Serbian and German schools also existed in my hometown, which was then called Nagybecskerek or Veliki Becskerek. It's not today Zrenjanin. This town became, in 1919, part of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. So it would have been really illogical and senseless for a kid who was going to school until the 3rd grade to say that from the 3rd grade you must change language. It was the same city, the same school, the same people, the same environment. Now, had my grandfather emigrated to the United States and taken my father, who was then 7-year-old, to the United States, it would have been way less easy and way less logical to request to continue his education in Hungary. So yes, there is a difference between migrants and between population who have a traditional root and who have a certain numerical number which is relevant, and to have also some structure. On the other hand, we all started as migrants. President Pastor talked that about 300 years ago, we were all newcomers. We also had a discussion who came first, and thanks God this discussion is not relevant anymore because it cannot be established, it's forgotten. So it's obvious that somebody who is a newcomer should not have the same culture and language rights as somebody who belongs to a well-established culture within that region. But everybody was a newcomer for a while. Turks are newcomers in Germany, but how will they be treated after 50 years or 100 years? So the question of different treatment of migrants is a question which is sensitive. I think it's logical to have a different treatment, but it's not a clear-cut yes or no position. Yet I do not want to devote particular attention to this. I just wanted to mention this issue. The European Charter says that those who do speak one of the recognized minority languages, languages which have some tradition, some structure, should have rights in the field of education, judicial authorities, administrative authorities and public services, media, cultural activities, economic and social life, and transborder exchanges. So quite a considerable list of rights, and this is where the recognition of difference should be elevated and should be and could be qualified as equality. Equality, let's say in the Vojvodina, is completely unthinkable otherwise, but by having more languages parallel. And let me make another point here. Often the question of democracy is brought into link with tolerance and equality. And again, here some differences should be made. If you are talking about electing the president of Serbia, then it's absolutely clear and obvious that every citizen of Serbia, be that a man or a woman, be that a Serb or a Slovak or a Hungarian or a Bosniak or a Croat, should have an equal vote. But if we are electing the head of the Lutheran Church, then not all Serbian citizens should have an equal vote. And if we are electing the head of a Hungarian cultural institution, or a Slovak, or a Romanian, or a Croat, or Ruthenian cultural institution, it's again quite clear that those people whose culture is at stake should have some special rights. And this is what takes us to cultural autonomy, which is probably the only way to achieve true equality in a multilingual and multicultural setting. Now let me also mention a few things which have emerged even among those who do not have a closed mind towards cultural diversity and tolerance and equality. Sometimes you have quite interesting rhetoric patterns, and it's very important to have a clear-cut logical system from which recognition of difference and equality would follow. A quite interesting example is when in Rambouillet, about 15 years ago, there was an attempt to chart an agreement which would provide for some solution of the Kosovo situation. And you had two proposals. One proposal was submitted by an American, Austrian, and Russian diplomat, The other proposal was submitted by Serbia. And here an issue came into the focus in a very interesting way, and this is the issue of so-called additional rights. Because sometimes in the system of logic, people are saying, yes, there are human rights available to everyone, and there are some additional rights which are by generosity available to minorities. There's nothing wrong with this approach. The question is whether this approach is really logically completely consistent. Now, when the Kosovo solution was drafted, it was not yet clear whether Kosovo would be perceived as a part of Serbia or as an independent state. And therefore, it was not clear whether Serbs would be a majority within Serbia, and then Kosovo included, or whether Serbs would be a minority in an Albanian majority Kosovo. So the question was, who should get additional rights? And the answer was that additional rights belong to every ethnic group and culture. And this was both the majority, both the Serbian proposal and the American, Austrian, Russian proposal. But if everybody has some surplus rights, some additional rights, the question arises whether these rights are actually additional or whether these rights are rights which belong to every human being. So the right to go to school on your own language, you can call, it's an additional right of both the majority or the minority, but you can also say that it is just a general human right of everyone. And let me also mention that additional rights are close to a concept, not completely equal, but close, and this is positive discrimination or affirmative action. There is a well-known American decision of the Supreme Court of the California versus Bakke, in which it was held that blacks should enjoy some positive discrimination in order to balance the century-long discrimination. So they should have some advantages in getting admitted to schools. And you had a famous sentence then that in order to go beyond race, you must take race into consideration rather than to ignore it. And this goes also for all multi-ethnic environments. In order to go beyond exclusion, you have to take into consideration indifference, otherwise you cannot. Now, what is positive discrimination in the context of multilingual regions like Vojvodina and many others in Europe, and not only in Europe? In my hometown, today, there are very few pupils anymore who would go to Hungarian school. You have a rule in Serbia about the number of pupils, of students, who can go to a school. And this number is normally a measurement, a rule of rationality. If you say that in Novi Sad you need 20 students to start a school, then it's a measure of rationality. But in Zrenjanin, if we have 18 Hungarian students, then 20 is not a measure of rationality, it's a measure of existence or non-existence. Likewise, in a small village in the Vojvodina, which has an almost 100% Hungarian population, if you have 16 Serbian students, then for them, 20 is not a measure of rationality, it's a measure of existence. So positive discrimination or affirmative action means that in such situations in which it's not anymore a matter of rationality, but a measure of existence, you have to allow special treatment in order to give a chance, otherwise there would be no chance. And finally, and this is also present in the Serbian constitution, which allows different measures in Article 76. Now, let me finish by saying, and this is quite important, I think, that particularly among people like this audience, I think we have a huge majority, probably about 100% of people, who are devoted to a multicultural, multi-ethnic existence, and who have who are envisioning equality via difference and not by denying difference. But there are many, many approaches to this. And let me say first that the most obvious denials of difference are denials which are today a little bit forgotten. We have chauvinism. Chauvinism was created by a French soldier. I mean, to his name it was tied. It is somewhat debated in history, but in all likelihood he existed. His name was Nicolas Chauvin. Nicolas Chauvin was born in 1780. He was a brave soldier of Napoleon. He got 17 wounds. He got 3 fingers amputated. He got a sabre d'honneur, a sword of honor. And he was super French, and he was absolutely exuberant, and nothing was good what was not French. But this type of chauvinism today is not so poisonous anymore. It's more funny than poisonous today. But let me show another way of trying to deny diversity, not with Nicolas Chauvin approach. I read recently, there is a debate, some of you know, some of you may not know. There is a city in Croatia, Vukovar, which has a substantial Serbian population, and which was one of the places, the sites of war, and with many victims, and of course you have passions which are still flaring. And in Vukovar there was a proposal to introduce Cyrillic letters because of the Serbian population, in addition to Latin alphabet. And this was denial, and this is still an ongoing debate in Croatia. Now, I read a statement of a Croatian politician who was against the Cyrillic letters. Let me add that there were quite a few Croatian politicians supporting Cyrillic letters. But this man said that we must not allow Cyrillic letters because this would lead to ghettoization of Serbs in Croatia. Now, this is much, much more tricky than Nicolas Chauvin, because he's using a framework, he's using a phrase. Everybody's against ghetto. We know ghetto is horrible. So he's saying, I'm not anti-Serb, I'm not a chauvinist. I'm just caring that these poor Serbs might be, find themselves in a ghetto if they use Cyrillic alphabet. Now, we have to learn that sometimes anti-minority attitudes are not simple Nicolas Chauvin attitudes, but they are using a actually pro-democratic, pro-minority, pro-human rights rhetoric, but with a different outcome. I've seen also that we have a cultural autonomy here. And I've heard saying that since national councils are not working perfectly, maybe there should be no national councils. Now, this is again, we are caring about democracy, but everybody should know that democracy is something which is not ready. It will remain, and it is a task. Parliamentary democracy is not perfect either. It doesn't mean that we should abandon parliamentary democracy. It means that we should keep building parliamentary democracy. The same goes with national councils. If there are imperfections in cultural autonomy, it doesn't mean that we should abandon cultural autonomy. It means, though, that we should always try to make it better and make it more perfect. And let me end in speaking about tolerance, majority, minority, that one of the wrong perceptions is to equate majority with normalcy. And this is often the case, and it's again sometimes not clearly outspoken, but you have a tendency to equate majority with normalcy. And I have seen about 10 years ago on an international conference in a West European country a wonderful example of this. There's a conference devoted to some international law matters. It was very much an international conference with people from many countries coming, including people from Israel. And we had a lunch, and this lunch was served, and next to some plates, you had a designation kosher food. And next to other plates, you had a designation normal food. Now, you see, this is a problem which is sometimes the problem of the majority. It was a very nice gesture. This man who organized it took on himself the tuxedo smoking of international tolerance, but he forgot the slippers of prejudices, and he remained within the logical concept of others are outside of normalcy. So what we have to do, and what is not always easy, but absolutely necessary, is to be aware that we only have equality and we only have tolerance if difference is not left outside the framework of normalcy, but if difference is a part of normalcy. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention.